Welcome back. What's going on, fellas? Welcome back to the Drafts and Drafts podcast. I'm Joe, aka Sultan. This is Dave, aka Disaster. And today we're doing roster reviews. But before we do, Dave, what's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing great, Joe. Excited to be back. We have kind of our unofficial episode 3, quasi 4. We're going to call it 4 for today, I think. Really excited to dive into the rosters and start ripping some of our Dynasty League mates teams or giving them credit and showing our feedback.
I love that. But before we get into that, I do want to continue the tradition of doing our draft reviews as we go through our second draft beer of the podcast. So if you don't mind, I'll go first. Today I have the Volair Italian Pilsner by Mighty Squirrel Brewing Co. It's a 5% alcohol, and I'm looking forward to giving it a taste. I've never had this one before. Let's get the fresh crack on air. Ooh, that was crisp.
I have I have out of St. Louis, Missouri. I have a freshly made Stella Artois.
Nice. It's new to the podcast. So take a sip, and then we'll break it down. What's your first impression? It's a new beer for you?
No, it's not a beer for me. I've hit a lot of Stellas in my day. Stella to me is a great beer. It's just a classic. So for me, it's a 4 out of 5. And I will always lean on Stella as a go-to. You know, if you're in a new place, you don't want to test IPAs, or you just want a consistent drink. I'm all on the Stella train.
I love that. Yeah. So I chose this because I've always had a penchant for Italian beers. I love Peroni, probably because of my Italian background. So this is, I would definitely say it's not quite as good as Peroni, but it's pretty tasty. And I think that's the big thing is you can tell it tastes light. I don't like drinking a beer like this and feeling full. So that's my quick review. Anyways, so roster reviews. The point of the episode today, I think you kind of touched on is would love to, one, rip apart our league mates. If anyone doesn't know, we're a 1-quarterback dynasty league. We were in our 5th season. We just completed our 5th season. We're in our 6th year. We have starting lineup of skill positions plus kickers and defenses. I know. So just to level set, we're a 1-point PPR, formerly 4-point passing TD. Now we're moving to 5-point passing TDs, and we're moving to tight end premium in 2 seasons. So the 2025 season. The point of this, I think, for me at least, will be 1, to rip apart our teammates' rosters, like we said. 2, I kind of want to give maybe some inspiration to some league mates to maybe think about their rosters a different way, and maybe even for me to think about my roster a different way, and you to think about yours. And I think the third one is, as we started having fun doing this, we realized we might have some good ideas that the average dynasty knucklehead like us may be able to draw some conclusions from, because although not everyone plays 1 quarterback or has the same lineups, somebody out there has Devontae Smith or Michael Pittman, and they're like, what do I do with him? My team is trying to contend. Do I break him up into 2 pieces? Do I consolidate and try to tier up? We're going to hopefully touch on some ideas or strategies, or maybe your roster looks similar to some of the rosters we're going through today. I chose 3 rosters that finished in the bottom 6 last year to start. I'm going to work our way up to the top 3. So we're going to start with the bottom quartile, middle quartile, and then top quartile of teams. That was my strategy.
Quartile.
You know me, finance guy. But before I do, I wanted to quickly, Dave, I want to know, so that the audience knows, if you could talk a little bit about your original team building approach, maybe how that's evolved, how that's changed, and maybe what your team building approach would be going forward if, say, you were to start a new team today. Like, leave your team bias currently aside and just kind of talk through the progression as a dynasty manager.
So before I jump into that, one caveat I want to lay out for anyone that's not in our league and you don't know exactly all of our rules. One of the biggest things that I mentioned, and I think in the first podcast, was we started with a lot of guys that had some fantasy football experience, but it wasn't 10 years. It was maybe a couple of years casually. None of them had dynasty experience. And we implemented a system initially where we tried to drive anti-tanking. We wanted every game to matter. And so in most leagues that are starting a dynasty, that's not, either they try to create anti-tanking rules, or they just don't care about it. Like, yeah, screw it. If you want to tank, who cares? So that one caveat here is that if you're the worst team by record, you're not guaranteed the first overall pick. And it's also not even if you're the lowest maximum points for, you're not guaranteed the first overall pick. The lowest max points for and the lowest record from last year has the third overall pick this year. Oh, no, he did get the first overall pick, but kind of by happenstance. Our system was drawn up that for the loser bracket mattered. If you progressed through the loser's bracket, you got into a lottery system. The further you made it in the loser's bracket, the more lottery balls you got to win the first overall pick. So our league is consistently incentivized to try to win. Now, if you're at the playoffs and it's, do you want to be the 16th in the playoff or the 7th team into the loser's bracket or the first loser? There's just debates there. But anyways, I just wanted to kind of caveat that there as we're going into these teams, because there really is, it's a hard thing to do to fully tank in our league, because you do want to have a good shot to get that first overall pick. So a lot of picks helps in the first round to kind of mitigate some of that risk if you have some other kind of questionable teams to try to get some of those top at least 1 or 2 picks. But just kind of a caveat there. So just real quick to answer your question, what kind of evolved for me? Again, I didn't really know anything about Dynasty. I had a really good rookie Dynasty draft where I had DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, and Terry McLaurin, and Jerry Jeudy all on my first team. So I didn't quite know the value of them. I probably undervalued them in their first season because I picked them later in the draft. And for me, I think that my evolution has gone where I saw a lot of draft picks. And for me, I wanted to continue. My team was strong. But I had kind of this people in their prime. And my optionality was, I'm not a big tanker. I wanted to keep going for it. So I kind of kept just spending picks to keep my team competitive. Last year, I had a few first round picks remaining, and I had the decision of either, okay, am I going to start loading up on picks for 25 and 26 and sell off my players, Christian McCaffrey, Devontae Adams, Derrick Henry, etc., or am I going to try to continue to compete and try to get younger? And so I happened to hit on those picks. If I didn't hit, I'd be hurting for the next few years probably. I'd be in a fire sale right now trying to get any picks I could get for some of my old guys. But yeah, it's starting now to try to balance youth with experience, with say, junior and senior players and third and fourth year players, while still trying to phase out my most experienced players. And I think that my initial goal for my team will be either going for it one more year, or if I start to have really good top-notch players as we get to week 5, 6, 7, sell them high, get a first-round pick, even though they might be good for 1 or 2 more years, capitalize on their top value right now for a team that wants to go win this year, and hopefully they can do that. So that's kind of my evolution. How about you?
Yeah, Dave, thanks for that. So I'm looking at our startup draft right now, and I just realized that you started your draft with AJ Brown, Marquise Brown, and John Brown in rounds 9, 10, and 11, which is kind of funny. You were just the Brown brothers team come to life. But
Brown boys.
No, that was helpful to hear, the progression of your dynasty game. Because if someone asked me to summarize your strategy, I would have said, Dave was the first one in our startup draft to take a quarterback, and he essentially loaded up on wide receivers after the first few rounds, just kept taking shots on wide receiver. Whereas like you look around at some of the other people who had different strategies, and I wouldn't say it was outlandish, but being the first one to take QB in Mahomes, 1 was the right QB to take, and 2, it was unique. But I guess, so if I look back, like you touched on, I had no dynasty experience coming into our league. And I had fantasy baseball experience and fantasy football experience. And I thought it would translate. I remember thinking it's all about running backs. I think I took Kamara first. I took Mari Cooper in the second. And I just kept pounding running back. I had Sony Michel, Chris Carson, Rashad Penny, like running back. And I remember in our first year, I said, fuck them picks. Like, I traded away Amari and a first to go get Michael Thomas. Like I remember telling you, I was like, the only thing that matters is your first 6 picks. Everything else doesn't matter. So I used to just be like, forget those picks. Fast forward 2 years later, and I completely 180'd. I was like, I'm all about these picks. I've been by 2021, I have been stockpiling 2023 firsts for several years, to the point where by the time that draft rolled around, everyone was like, oh shit, Latino has half the draft in the first round. And it was like, yeah, not by luck or anything. But so, yeah, it's funny to see how times have changed. And I feel like if I were to go into a startup now, I don't know how I would do prioritize things, but I think I would lean a little bit more towards receivers, as I think most of our league would start to shift towards.
I
We're
think
starting to see that.
so. It's funny, if I did a starter draft, I think I would have to evaluate. I would love to go last, or like actually last or mid would be great. I wouldn't really want to go first, even though you think that that's the right value to be at. But I would want to see how people are drafting, because I would 100%. There needs to be one or two guys that take best available player, but old. And I would just go like, because you have someone has to win the first season, so why not win with old guys that are like, you know, back end of their prime, but people are going to maybe want to take in the sixth round. Like you're probably taking Devon Tams now somewhere in like the sixth or seventh or eighth round. Okay, I'll take him in the seventh round. Like I don't care if it's going to be my wide receiver 3, because I got a couple other good guys in the first few rounds, and just start building old. Like grab the if Kelsey's playing, grab the Kelseys at the time, and it's something like that too. Where if you actually want to build the right way, what you just said is perfect, and I think that's great. But I do think you should always have one or two, and if it is not a bad strategy, if you just want to go and win, now if you lose, then it freaking sucks. But there's a lot of old guys that are going to be in their late of their prime or still in their prime, but are not going to be valued appropriately. And if you want to go grab those a couple, half round ahead to build that team, you're going to have a really good redraft team compared to others where they're going to be like, yeah, they might hit, they might not, but I think they're okay. Like if you grab a JSN this year, he's probably not going to be as good as a Tyreek Hill or a Devontae Adams. So that's the question marks of, do you want to win this year or do you want to potentially build to the future? And so all the way, I love it. And I think the only things I would say too is like if I was starting one, I would much prefer to do a like a sorry, the word blank for me. I just lost it. But a salary cap. I would love to do a salary cap league. I think that for a dynasty, because then you're not hunkered down by, I didn't get the 1-1, so I can't get X, whoever that player is, or Justin Jefferson, if it's not a super flex, or maybe Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen if it is a super flex. You're not beholden to anything, right? And now you can buy whatever you want based on your budget, and it's up to you to manage your budget. So that's one thing I would love to have, at least on the initial draft, is a salary cap. But man, that's
No, I love that. You brought up one thing that I didn't have written down, but so I think it's important because it's gonna translate into how we evaluate these rosters. Is you mentioned, how does the rest of the draft influence the way you draft? Because if everyone in front of you is taking 22-year-old receiver, if it goes Jefferson, Lamb, Jordan Addison, Chase, whatever, I can't think, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, all of a sudden you're sitting there at 112 and you're like, well, shit, do I just go Saquon and Jacobs right away and just hammer not only the two of the better running backs available, or do I go CMC and Saquon right off the rip? And then, it's a bit riskier of a build, obviously, because one is not even wide receiver, and two, it's older running back. But now you have this advantage. Does seeing the rest of the league influence your decisions? How does that change your roster building? Whereas you might say, hey, the most optimal thing for me to do would be to trade away CMC for a couple firsts in 2026. But then you see a roster we're going to go through who already has half the 2026 firsts, and you go, am I too late to this tanking party? Should I just stick it out for another year? Do you let the rest of the league's rosters influence your decisions, or do you solely try to build your roster the best way you want based on how your roster looks?
I think that's a tough predicament. So there's two kind of questions there. I think if you're in the draft, you are somewhat beholden to how everyone else is behaving, and it's your decision whether you want to kind of build against the grain or with the grain. And it's impactful it's impactful as you get to maximizing a certain position, right? So like tight end, quarterback, you need one. So if they're flying, you're probably okay as long as you're okay having a back half. But if you wait too long, people are going to start taking their second quarterback. Kind of same thing with tight end. If you wait too long, well, now maybe instead of grabbing a 7, 8, 9 tight end, you're grabbing a 13, 14, 15, 16 tight end that you weren't really banking on to have be your starting tight end. Same thing kind of plays out with all the other positions, but it can be a little bit longer where you're now looking at tiers, which is probably the more appropriate way to look at it. If I were to do a full dynasty now again, I wouldn't rank everything. Let the analysts do the rankings. I would come through and say, okay, where's my tier, right? If I'm looking at like for redrafts, probably easier for me to talk about right now off the top of my head. But if I have like Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Chase, all those guys, right? where does the tier stop? Are all of them in the same tier? Is AJ Brown out? Is Stephon Diggs out? Is Amon-Ra St. Brown out? And then, okay, if they're out, where they start tier 2, is there anyone else I'd lump in there? Is it Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, whatever? And so the tier is the most important piece to me to actually influence my thing, because if you have, like, say the top 3, Hurts, Mahomes, and Allen, all in the same tier, well, I don't really care then if you take Mahomes, if it's 3 picks to me, because I know I can still grab at least one of those guys, whatever it might be. So it's kind of evaluating it more that way, I think, is the important thing. And it's probably more prudent on the single positions, the tight ends and the quarterbacks, because your tiers to 12 is pretty much it. And then after 12, it's not that you don't care, but it matters a little bit less in a single tight end, single QB, especially without tight end premium. And then wide receivers, yeah, you can have bigger tiers, but you want to make sure you can try to get a true wide receiver 1. Can you get 2 wide receiver 2s to fill out wide receiver 2 and 3 in your skills, and so stuff like that. But then the second part, what you're saying as far as the managing your dynasty team throughout the season and go to tank or go 100%, because last year I tried to see who else was tanking. Not many were, but the value wasn't there for me to tank. And so that was the question, right? Like, if I'm going
that's
to tank,
interesting.
If I'm going to tank, I have to have the value play out of it. And so what I was looking at, I was like, okay, I can give up all these assets, and I think at the time I think it was a preseason. So it's pre, like, CMC having a good season and some other things. I was looking at like 3 first-round picks. And I was like, okay, with 3 first-round picks, if they're early, so I'd also trade to the right person for the right picks at the right time. If they're early and soon, maybe it's worth it. But if it's not, is it better to guts it out with them and try to use my other first round picks to build the other pieces I think I need to win? And the other thing is too, is like, I think I'm going to explore more this year that I haven't in the past, is potentially giving up my medium pieces. Like when we have George Pickens and Terry McLaurin, who are not old yet. They're kind of in middle tiers. What if I lump them with like a second round? Could I get a first and a second, or hit them in a third? Can I get a first and a second, or a first, or what does that look like to tier them up to the pick I actually want to rebuild?
That's creative. I like that.
So things like that. But yeah, it definitely is. Like, I wished last year more teams would have just tanked. But I think the other thing is, like, if they're valuing Keenan Allen's a bad example, but like, actually,
no, it's a good example.
But yeah,
sorry, Turtles.
The Amari Coopers, the Keenan Allens, the DJ Moores, like these kind of like somewhat. Those are some of the older ones, but also in prime people.
DJ Moore is 26, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Tyreek Hill might be a great one too, where like Tyreek Hill to me is a perfect example to what my situation is with the running back side of what are you going to get for him? Like, are you getting a first? It's only take a first. Well, damn, maybe I just wanted to pay Tyreek Hill a first for one season to go fucking win, versus, and you might not have him forever. He might end up retiring on your team, unfortunately, or you can get a second or a third for him the year after if you want to try to sell, and you're trading enough to try to win this year. So it's kind of that value trade-off. But if the demand for Tyreek Hill is 2 firsts, that might not be worth it. But then if he's 2 firsts, can I get a first for Devontae? Can I get a 2 firsts for CMC? Can I get 1 first for Henry? Like, so measuring that market and then what's making it is a big question. And last year, the big trade was Jalen Waddle, who went for 2 firsts and 2 seconds. And that kind of set the market for where people were valuing this youth and talent and skill. And then I tried to purchase around the same rate, similar receivers. And it was very much an inconsistent and imperfect market where the values were just drastically different.
Yeah, I think you highlight one thing that I think a lot of managers in our league are very risk averse to the point where they'd rather lose with their asset in their hands than make the trade where the asset blows up one way or the other. Like, it's really tough to say, let me push all my chips in on Christian McCaffrey, because if he blows out his ACL, I'm screwed. And I don't want to touch on your trades, because I want to save it for your roster review, because I think that you've made some really awesome trades. I want to talk about it when we talk about your team. But some people have in the past, been reluctant to make big trades, because I think it's a little nerve-wracking, even though it's just Dynasty, it's just fantasy football. It's still like, it's your team. It's your own. For most of us, it's the only team we care about. And it's really hard to say, let me make this risky trade to go all in or to tank when it could totally backfire. You go all in, you tank, you get the 101, you draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and you look like kind of a moron. But all right, we spent too much time in the intro. Let's get into our first roster review. So let's bring up the Smithfield Shiny Shuckles.
Let's go.
So this is one of the most polarizing teams in our league. So if you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see I pulled up a little graphic here that shows their record each of the first 5 seasons, what place they finished in, and then their cumulative record and cumulative placement.
So one quick call out. Before last season, they had the second best overall record of any team in our league.
Really?
They were number 2. I think they had a 67% win rate prior to last year when they went 0-14.
Yeah, actually true. If you just take 14, 36-18 prior to last year. So they start first. They've come in, for those of you listening at home, they came in 2nd, 9th, 2nd, 3rd, and 11th. So they've placed in the money 3 times in our 5 seasons. And the 2023 season, they went 0-14. So they've basically placed 3 out of 4 years where they were attempting to place. And this manager's made some crazy trades, some crazy deals, and we've certainly watched Dan's strategies around building his roster completely 180. Talk about I mentally, internally made some changes and slowly chipped away at my strategy. Dan flipped the light switch on and off, and I'm going to go to his roster right now. I'm going to bring up right now. I have a view at home. For those of you listening on the podcast, you can't see this, but we'll list some of the key players. I have a list of their key rostered players in 2021 and of the key rostered players in 2024. So notably in 2021, and this was their team that they had that lost in the championship. They had Tom Brady at quarterback. They had Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler at their 2 running back slots. They had CeeDee Lamb and Cooper Kupp at their wide receiver slots. Christian McCaffrey was on IR. They were loaded with talent. I mean, they were unstoppable. They had 4 or 5 first-round redraft picks on this roster, and they couldn't bring home a title, but they still banked some money away. I think what they did as a team is, if we read through their 2024 roster, here's the current state of their 2024 roster. They're currently sitting on Matt Stafford at QB, Zeke and Kareem Hunt at running back. You got Michael Pittman and Gabe Davis anchoring your wide receiver slots. And on taxi, you got Jaden Reed, Anthony Richardson, and Michael Mayer. Yeah, that looks like an 0-14 team, if you ask me.
Dude, Gabe Davis though, Gabe Davis to the moon,
right? And so if we think back, can you recall? I have some of them banked away. They've made some huge trades. They traded away in 2021. The big one that because it affected me was 3 firsts and 3 seconds for Christian McCaffrey midseason, only to have Christian McCaffrey blow out his knee 2 games later. They traded away Amari Cooper, first round pick for Amari Cooper mid-season in 2021 to make a push for or 2022 to make a push for the title. They traded away, originally traded away Christian McCaffrey for Alvin Kamara and Russell Wilson back in our first season. They ended up coming in second. So he's been a constantly his first season he traded away his first, second, third, and fourth round pick for Kareem Hunt. So he originally was always a guy who said, fuck them picks. I'm trading them away. I'm going to get players. Only to have him complete 180 that. And I'm going to pull up his picks now just to complete the picture of his roster. If we look at his 2021 team, he only had 1 second round pick for the following 3 drafts, 22, 23, and 24. 1 second round pick. And he had a bunch of fourths and thirds. I'm not even going to list them off because it doesn't matter. Fast forward to today. He's got the 201 and 212 in this year's draft. He's got a 25 first and 2 seconds in the 2025 draft. And he's currently sitting on 4 2026 firsts and 4 2026 seconds. So yeah, his lineup was bare, but his team is chock full of players. And in order to acquire some of those picks, he made deals like he traded away Kyron Williams for a first. He traded away Rashee Rice and a second for a first. He traded away, I can't remember all the deals he did to get first. I think he traded away his 24 first for my 26 first and second. Things like that, where he's trying to build up future capital, knowing that he's not going to compete for the next couple of years. right or wrong, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. He's trying to say, I want to corner the market on that 2026 class so I become the banker. If you want a part of that draft, you have to come to me. And everyone knows when rookie fever hits, rookie fever hits. And if he sticks around and makes all those picks,
If
good for
there's
him.
hold on. If there's just to jump in there. First of all, the fact that I got a second round pick with Freshly Rice makes that trade so good. I didn't know I did that until you just told me. So thank you.
Yeah, that was a sick trade for you.
I will say that everyone knows that when rookie fever hits, it hits, except for Dan, because it doesn't hit him. And I don't want to go too far into what he's told me his thoughts are, but I'm talking him off a ledge and telling him to be patient. And I think that's his biggest flaw right now is that, and this is maybe for any new dynasty manager, because I think that we all kind of got it the first 2 seasons, is making trades to make trades because it just feels good. And he has the itch. It's like,
yeah,
he
but
needs more
Dave, I
cowbell, he
need
needs more
that.
trades.
I need that dopamine hit of a trade has been completed. Like I need oxygen to breathe. Like I need beer to get the shakes to go away. Just kidding. But okay, so we've seen his roster, we've seen his picks. You kind of gave a little insight into what you think Dan is thinking, but let's put yourself in his shoes. What you take over this team today? What's maybe identify some cornerstone pieces or assets that you say maybe you want to build around this, or is everything for sale? Are you making trades? Are you waiting for people to come to you? Are you initiating? Can you give me a little bit of insight of what you might try to do first?
So I'll give him my exact advice I told Dan, and because it's exactly what I would do in his situation. The challenge is, I think in his situation too, and maybe for a lot of other dynasty managers as well, you don't watch college football. I don't watch college football. I am probably 50-50 on my hits in drafts picks. And that is what it is. I just don't watch a lot of college football. And so I think for Dan, if he really doesn't watch college football and doesn't even do the research going into it of like, well, who are the best players targeting even the second round or the third round for these rookie drafts, he puts himself into a tough situation where if he makes those picks, I haven't gone back and looked at his picks. I don't think they're very good. Although he did pick up Richardson, Michael Mayer.
Stroud, Rice, and Reed were his last 3 draft picks. He has never made a first round pick in our league. Just for those of you at home, he's never made a first round pick.
Those are crushing it picks then. So I mean, maybe he's just then is so impatient again, where I think that his whole thing is the lack of patience, and because he is trying to always make his team better. So my push to him was specifically on his taxi squad. I said, listen, you have 3 players. I said, I think Jaden Reed, he kind of overvalues Jaden Reed for the situation because they still have Dobbs and Watson there. I said, you could try to sell him, but I don't think you're going to get the value until someone else leaves. And I don't think it's going to be Jaden Reed. It could be. I think it's going to be Watson or Dobbs. But whatever that situation is, you're not going to get max value right now for him. Just pause. Just wait. Keep him on your roster. You then have Richardson and Michael Mayer that could be phenomenal players. Let them prove that they're phenomenal. Let them play out. And if they don't, you have all these other picks in 3 years that are going to let you do more things with them. But if they have an amazing season, you can sell high. Maybe it's not their full max value, but you can sell into them. For everything else on his team, I told him, I said, I just start trying to piecemeal out what you can get. I don't hate Michael Pittman. I have concerns about Pittman. I have concerns he's going to stay in Indianapolis. I have concerns they're going to draft another player. Josh Downs is right there too, who's a really solid wide receiver behind him as well. Anthony Richardson's a big runner. I have concerns with that combination that for me, I think you can get enough from Michael Pittman that would warrant the trade right now, or even 3 weeks into the season when he has 60 fantasy points across 3
Definitely.
games. People are like, holy shit. And he still probably has 3 more good years in the league on paper if you're just looking at him as a player. But for me, I wouldn't say like, oh, it's still going to be good in 2026 or 2027. So
exactly,
I would be in the situation where I'm like, all right, I'm not going to trade him today, but I'm going to trade him as soon as his value starts to peak where he's for say 4+ weeks into the season, he's top 12 wide receiver, sold. Give me 2 firsts. He's gone. Nothing else. And he's out of there. And now you have 2 more firsts to play around with. And then the piece I leveraged to Dan, I said, okay, I'm keeping some of these picks. But I said, hopefully you're adding 2 more firsts, and a couple more seconds, and a couple more thirds. So you just have a frick ton of picks. And I said, if it's future, so if you start some of those 26s, maybe you go spend 2 on a kind of proven rookie wide receiver, not rookie, probably a sophomore or junior wide receiver that you're like, I want this. But I'm not doing this year. I'm doing it next year. And I'm going to try to do it again in the offseason when things are not that hot for someone that you really like. If you want to start building that way to have some core pieces to build around, because if Anthony Richardson isn't a hit, you need to build around a quarterback. I would try to build around, can I get a top 5 tight end for a couple first round picks for someone that maybe wants to go into a rebuild? If you can get those two, now it's okay. Build your wide receiver core, some through the draft, hopefully. If you're really that impatient, you can go buy them too. But I said you should. I told him your goal, if you want to buy, don't buy anything this year. Buy in 1 to 2 years. Buy when I'm telling you not to buy, off season, etc. Buy when it's cheap, and then take half your picks. Just whatever half your picks are, you have to take half of them. I said because even if you just throw a dart at the wall, if you're in those first 6 picks, you're going to hit half of them. And I was like, so if you have 7 first round picks, or I think it's like probably 5 or something like that. But I was like, okay, then keep 2.5. If it's 2 or 3, I don't care. But do not sell all of them, please. Like at some point, take those first round picks. And that's how I would rebuild his roster, is to slowly chip away. But I told him, unfortunately, the moves he made last year, I berated him on the phone for like 30 minutes about it, because I was like, you just ruined your rebuild. I said, you now have pushed this at a full 12 months past, maybe another 24 months because of those trades you just made. And so that's how I would try to restructure his roster. You're not going to get a lot for a lot of the guys. Some guys are just going to retire on your team, and that's okay. It's going to be an unfortunate money pit for 2 years to rebuild it. And I think that's for him, where he's like, well, do I just buy everything now? And I said, absolutely not. Because even if you can get good players, one, you're decimating your next 4 years again. If anyone does get injured, hurt, traded, like we've seen so many big trades this offseason too, like you can see how much that can change someone's value. And I said you can get them for a lot cheaper if you have the picks, because 1 pick can turn to 3 picks. It's just pause, like take a breath, like just let the patience come through. And if anything, maybe you can do some creative thinking where it's like, hey, I have a 2026 first. I'm going to trade one of those and maybe one of my bonus seconds for a first this year, because you want to get in the draft this year, or you want to get in the draft next year with another first.
I
Leverage
agree with
that
that.
ability during the draft. Because I said one of the benefits in our league when you're trading, our league, outside of maybe you and me and a couple others, but I'd say 70% of the league does not value this year pick versus a 2026 pick very differently. They are basically, oh, first round pick, okay, like that's all they really see, and they're cool with it. So I said, come to that time when you're in the draft, they don't really know who to pick. They don't really want to pick anything. And they're like, oh, yeah, you'll give me another first and a third, or another first and a second, or even a second this year that you don't want to take a 212 and a first in 2026. All right, yeah, sure. I'll give you this first. That's a 106 or a 105 if they don't really know, and let it play out that way.
Yeah. I really thanks, Dave. That was a lot. I think you touched on quite a bit. So for anyone who's trying to worry, I think this is a good example to lead with, because Dan's such a unique build. That's such a complete teardown rebuild, which I don't think we've seen that yet in this league, other than the Merman, who wasn't really by choice. But Dan willingly broke apart a dynamite roster and went into a voluntary rebuild and made some questionable moves, some savvy trades. Either way, he had a vision, which I appreciate the most. Like he said, yeah, I may be giving up Rice, and Rice may be a stud. Maybe he's not, but I have my eye set on the 1 in front of the pick. He wants the first for the trade value in the future and doesn't care how he gets it. And like you said, I actually disagree with a little bit about the pick value in Dan. I think Dan does not care at all about where the pick is, what year it is. If I told him I'll give him a 28 first and a third for his 2025 first, gone. It's an extra third, a free extra third. He's not going to make the pick anyways in his eyes. To him, it's I'm not making that pick, so I don't care where it ends up. But as we saw this past year, his first, which he in his head was like, it's probably going to be like the 106, maybe the 105. Somehow won the lottery. It was the 101. So it made that trade look a lot worse than it was on paper. Which, for you guys' reference, he traded away his 2024 first for a 2026 first and second, I think. So to him, he netted an extra free second, and he lost out on maybe a few picks slots. Like he might have gone from the 106 to the 109, when in reality it became the 101. So
the 101 to probably the 111.
Yeah. But so I think the other thing I wanted to mention was the whole idea of trading into the draft. I think that's it's a sneaky strategy I never thought of for Dan. I don't think for a second he would ever say, hey, at the 111, there's a guy that I think should have gone at 106 and he's still there. So I'm willing to give you my first for that pick. Because I think, one, he's not going to scout players like that. And two, like we just said, to him, a first is a first. So why would I give a future first for the 111 when it's probably going to be better? Like, why would I do that? When it's like, in reality, a 2026 first is probably worth like the 202 in 2024. Like, just in terms of the points that 202 is going to score you for 2 full years before you even make that 2026 pick. It's probably about equal in terms of trade value. So for those of you who have balked at Dan's offer of his 201 for your future first, it's probably a pretty fair trade. But I don't want to spend too much time on every team. I wanted to just quickly go through, like, how I would, if I took over Dan's team right now, I would be so excited to have future picks because there's so much you can do with it. And as we saw, right now, no one cares about 2026, but when that 2026 offseason hits, people are going to be crawling to Dan for those picks, or just jealous that they don't have them. Maybe they're not going to willing to be fooled, but and if I was to look at the players on his team and who I'd want to build around, if you asked me a couple years ago, I would have said QBs and a 1 QB. Who gives a shit? Like, you can find them in the second, third round. Jalen Hurts was a third round pick in our rookie draft, And then I look at my team and I'm thinking, like, okay, if someone came to me and offered me a future first for Lamar Jackson, would I take it? And I'm like, I literally could not take that. My team would be stuck with Jared Goff, and then how would I replace him? I'd have to try to draft Caleb Williams and hope he was as good as Lamar, or try to trade for Josh Allen. And Brent's going to tell me, like, I've realized that those top 6 to 8 scoring quarterbacks are so valuable in one quarterback because they make up like 20% of your scoring. That I think Dan takes Anthony Richardson and he goes, he's the foundation, the centerpiece of this team. And I'll hold Pittman until somebody comes to give me the value that I want. But like you said, everything else is disposable. At this point, what's the difference between adding another decent wide receiver or not? He's still going to go 1-13. So unless he right, there's nothing to gain for him to hold Gabe Davis.
And to do like a top line summary, I said, hey, delay, wait a year, try to maximize value on players that you can sell now, even for seconds, thirds, firsts. And I said, build receivers through the draft and go buy the running backs afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common sentiment. I think that's probably the right way to go about it. And I just, the main point that I think I was lost on me in the past was just the importance of quarterback. Because I've always been like, oh, you see, if you were to pull up sleeper rookie ADP right now, I think Caleb Williams is the ADP rookie 105 in one quarterback. And I kind of laughed at it. I was like, there's no way he should be going 105. That's bullshit. And then I'm like, if he's the next Mahomes or Josh Allen, he absolutely should be going in the top 6 or at least the top 10, like 8. He should be a first round pick is what I'm trying to get at. And I used to say, no way would I ever spend a first on quarterback. I've since changed my tune. But
saying a first in a rookie draft.
Yeah, first in a rookie draft. Yeah. I used to think no shot, and now I think
that's how it kind of goes in our league. Which, by the way, he actually didn't draft Richardson.
No, he traded for him. Correct. He traded CJ Stroud.
Yep.
But Richardson was a first round pick. Richardson was the 110. But I almost kind of laughed at it when Gilday did that. I was like, what an idiot who'd spend a first on a quarterback. And now I'm like, what a brilliant pick. That was such a good pick.
Yeah.
But
I guess CJ Stroud was too. You could have had CJ Stroud. Like, didn't need to make that.
You make a good point. I guess while we're on the topic, because I think it's a good one, is I think the longevity at QB, which matters so much in Superflex, why a guy like Stroud is so valuable, because you have at least a QB 1 or 2 for the next 10 years in one quarterback. That's why the scrambling QBs are phenomenal. You want that Lamar Jackson, that Anthony Richardson, that Jalen Hurts, the guy who can go get you 10 rushing touchdowns on the ground, an extra 700 yards, just gives you that 4 or 5 point floor every week. A guy like Stroud it's great and all, but he's got to pass for 40 plus touchdowns a year to get you in the same league as those rushing quarterbacks. And if a guy like Richardson peters out, okay, you got to spend a year with Dak, 2 years with Dak as your QB, and then you come back. Like, that's not that bad of a stopgap. But you lose out on a quarterback.
I don't know if it's going to be Dak. It might be Matt Stafford, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the backups in one quarterback are better than your backups in Superflex. You're going from when Justin Fields got knocked out of being the starter, you went from Justin Fields to Sam Darnold as your new QB2. So that's why I think it's just longevity matters so much more and stability matters so much more in quarterback in Superflex than in one quarterback. But anyways, let's move on to our next team. we have the Staten Island Pizza Rats. This is our only former international squad. The Pizza Rats are managed by a kid named James, who was originally from across the pond in London. This team's seen some shit, to put it lightly. They've had one winning season in our 5 seasons. They've come in 11th, 6th. They had a playoff berth in their second year, and then 12th, 7th, 7th. So they are the back-to-back consolation bracket champs. Like, that is not an easy task. Like, round of applause. Like, he is just a master of dominating the bottoms. He's got an average placement of 9th in the league, and I think this is a roster that could use some guidance. So let's go flip over to his team, and I'll show you where he was. And if you want, I can talk a little bit. He actually had the 101 in our startup draft, taking Saquon Barkley as his first overall pick. And he actually got Kelsey in the 3rd. But after that, he had some hopeless picks. He got Chris Godwin, Tyler Boyd, N'Keal Harry, David Njoku, who's good now, Jordan Howard. Like, got a lot of some of these guys aren't even playing in the NFL anymore. So again, not everyone had a good startup. But that's how he started. At the end of 2021, James had a lineup that consisted of Tyler at QB. He had Zach Moss and Melvin Gordon were his running backs. But he had Ramondre Stevenson and James Conner on his bench. And then he had Devontae Smith and Chris Godwin were anchoring his wide receivers, along with Travis Kelce at tight end. So not a terrible team, which is middle of the pack, as we kind of just talked about. I think he went 6-7 in 2021, 5-9. Fast forward to today. His lineup is Kyler still at quarterback. He's got James Cook now and James Conner are his running backs, with Ramondre on IR, which I don't have pictured. And then his wide receiver room is pretty solid, actually. DJ Moore, Chris Godwin, Devontae Smith, and the unfortunate Quentin Johnston, with Evan Ingram anchoring his tight end room. So
we got Hollywood Brown. He traded a first for him.
He does have Marquise Brown, yeah. Who I think that's the missing piece. So I don't know why I don't have his bench on here. I know he had a couple other bench guys I'm missing, but he has a pretty solid foundation. It's just one of those teams that's lacking an identity one way or the other. You touched on a little bit. Let's go to his picks before we talk about some of the moves he's made. In 2021, he had all of his picks every year. He had not made a single trade, basically. He had one extra third. Fast forward to 2024, also very limited trading action. He doesn't have his first this year, but he does have all of his picks in 2025 and all of his picks but his second in 2026. So you can already tell this manager doesn't make a ton of trades. He's traded away or acquired, looks like on average, 2 picks every 3 years. And his team isn't terrible. He's clearly not running his team to the ground, but it's just, talk to me a little bit, because some of the trades he's made are, he had that huge Saquon Barkley trade years back that you were a part of, I believe. Yep. I don't think I can pull up that trade right here. Unfortunately, I can't pull that up. But
I'll pull it up real quick.
Yeah, if you want to pull up that
I
trade.
acquired Saquon for Melvin Gordon, Juju Smith-Schuster, and a first.
So at the time, Juju was still
great,
lauded as a stud. He wasn't playing well, but he was formerly a first-round pick in our startup. And Melvin Gordon hadn't yet retired. So, and the first, so that it was a solid haul. I know he traded away his first-round pick last year, Michael Mayer, for Michael Thomas, and he traded with Michael Mayer and a second for Michael Thomas. That was not the best trade of all time, but it was definitely a trade.
Yeah.
And the big one mid-season last year that I think got a little pushback or a little flack for was he traded away his 2024 first for Hollywood Brown.
Which, and a big discussion around that was where I talked to him because I was trying to buy his assets. I said, hey, let's look at your team. Your team sucks. And I said, you should really try to rebuild. You still have all your picks. Go acquire a few more. Get a couple firsts. You might be good next year. Like, I don't know, but like, let me help you. Let me buy some of your shit.
Yeah, he
So
wasn't in playoffs at the time. I remember because that was a focal point. He was 3-2 or something, or 3-1, and was in line to make a playoff run.
No, I think this was preseason.
Oh, okay. I'm talking about when I made the Hollywood trade.
This was right when Jalen Waddle trade happened.
Okay,
Kind
I
of
was talking
before.
about. Gotcha. Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
That's right, because I was trying to acquire Jalen Waddle, and the cost got too high for what I was willing to pay. You know, it wasn't far off, but I was like, all right, I value Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith about the same. I think they both have great quarterbacks. They both have a wide receiver one ahead of them that might not be there forever, and hopefully they can all both become wide receiver ones. And so I was like, I'll go buy him for what I think I can afford him for. And I made the offer to James, and it was pretty standoffish. And his stance was like, I'm keeping him. And I was like, all right, you can keep him, but you're not really doing things to make your team elite. Your team has consistently been mid, and you're not doing the things necessary to make your team good. So then he's like, all right, I'll fucking show you. And he spent a first round pick for Derek Carr and Marquise Brown. And I went back to him. I was like, that wasn't what I was fucking talking about. But okay.
In his defense, he was a playoff team at the time. And he would, for the record, even though it ended up becoming the 104, he was one game from making playoffs during the season. I remember biting my nails going, God, he better not make playoffs. Like, came down to the wire.
And then so there was that trade. Then there was also your trade with him was the Hollywood Brown one. And then like around the same time, he did the Michael Mayer trade where he added a second to Michael Mayer, which I think most people would believe is going to become a pretty solid tight end for the oldest can be Michael Thomas, and a third round pick. So
yeah, that's you know what? Can't win them all. Can't win any of them sometimes.
You could try to win some. You could try to win some of them.
I might be asking too much.
You also don't have to give it away for free. Let's put it that way. You don't have to.
All right. So, David, same question as we have with the Shuckles. You get dropped into the Staten Island. You have to run this Pizza Rats org, build them from the bottom up. Where do you start? What assets are you identifying as building around it or untradeable? What are you willing to part with? What do you think? Like, even though Devonta Smith may be the best piece to build around, he's probably also the most valuable right now. So that's how do you navigate that? I think his lineup looks good. He might not need too many pieces to quote unquote compete, but he may not be a top 3 or 4 teams. Like, how do you, if you're him, decide what you think you should do?
So that's a good question. I think the evaluation piece for him is the big thing is self-evaluation, right? How good is DJ Moore? How good is Chris Godwin? How good is Marquise Brown?
Yeah, DJ Moore was a top 10 receiver last year. No slouch.
Right. Yeah, sure, but he does a new quarterback and he has Keenan Allen now. So how good is
good point.
Chris Godwin had a shit year, a couple shit years in a row. Mike Evans is still elite. He's still on the team. He's got fucking paid, so he's not going anywhere. One is Godwin stay in Tampa Bay, and what happens? Does he build rapport with Baker for year 2? Otherwise, it's going to be the same fucking show, and Godwin's going to be doo-doo. And so there's so many question marks there that if I'm him, so I guess, again, it comes to evaluation. Where do you evaluate? If he evaluates all those players as good, which I wouldn't. I would say there's a lot of more yellow than there is green of like, I know they're going to be good. Like Devonta Smith is like, I know he can be good. But again, he had a bad year. So like I'd be spending what I was going to pay for him. I'm very happy I didn't with his performance last year because I would be broke, have nothing else I can do. He looks good on paper, but he's kind of in this frustrating thing where does he want to trade? Does he want to stay? What's going on there? And so when you look at James' team, like you have to decide the evaluation. I would say if I took it over, I would not value them the way that I think he values them. And so I would ideally love to keep Devonta Smith. What I would try to do is I would see who likes Chris Godwin, Quentin Johnson, DJ Moore, and Hollywood Brown. And I would try what I said before about packaging. I would try to go to someone that has no depth, a la Brent, and say, hey, Brent, let me get a first and a second for Hollywood Brown and Chris Godwin. And
nice. Let me stop you right there because I want to ask you then. You said you have to evaluate yourself, your teammates as a whole. Let me take you through. You say he should trade some of his players for picks, right? Let me take you through some of his rookie picks over the years. So since 2020, he's drafted with his first round picks: Henry Ruggs, Zach Moss, Devonta Smith, James Cook, Quentin Johnston. So
you're hitting more bombs than wins.
He's arguably landed on literally 3 of the biggest landmines. And yeah, I know Zach Moss has now started to come on, but he's been long off the Pizza Rats roster, so it's hard to call that a hit pick. So he hit on Devontae Smith's been, like you said, a solid player, but I don't know if, given our roster lineup depth and format, he's not a difference maker as our wide receiver 1. Henry Ruggs killed someone. He literally killed that roster, and he's killed somebody in real life. So it's like, RIP, no disrespect, but so it makes me, maybe it gives him pause to say, I don't know if I want to push in some players for picks. Like, I don't trust myself to make these picks. I would rather go the other direction and take my chances on trading away some picks for players and running the game, because I think I disagree with you a little bit. I think he's got a very solid roster. I think James Conner is sneaky good. I think Ramondre had an underwhelming season. James Cook's coming on. He's got a core 4 that's like, DJ Moore is a wide receiver 1. Devontae's a good wide receiver 2. Godwin and Hollywood are above average wide receiver 3s and 4s. And Engram in a tight end premium would have been tight end 1 last year. I didn't get a chance to show that in the team meeting, but because of his reception volume, he had 110 receptions last year. He's got a great core, not a ton of depth, doesn't have the draft capital this year to really supplement it. Unless he gets savvy, maybe you should trade away that 204 and try to go get, package the 204 and Quentin Johnston up, because like it or not, QJ still has some hype and has some potential. Can he go get a I'm trying to think of somebody like a DK Metcalf? Like, I don't think Bone would bite on it, but that type of player where you're like,
I know what you're saying.
Somebody else who's 27, 20. Could he go get Deebo Samuel? Somebody who's a little bit older. You give him a second round pick and a young promising stud, and go really fill out your wide receiver 3 or 4 slot with an extra player. I think that'd be the strategy I would go, because Kyler's good. You have 3 running backs. You don't need to do anything dramatic. If you really want to, Dan's trying to get 26 first. You could probably send your 26 first, go get Michael Pittman right now. No question. All you have to do is pay the $200 to prepay the league. But sorry to interrupt, but that's how I think that, that would be a great way to try to rebuild this roster or go for it this year.
No, I think, yeah, and that's evaluation of the players, right? Like, if you look at this team, he could have 2 top wide receiver 1s. He could also have none. And he could have only 2 wide receiver 2s. So the risk there, that's where, like, if I'm him, I would rather take DJ Moore and a first and try to get AJ Brown or like whatever, something of that caliber.
That's an awesome idea.
Or like even Devontae Smith. Go to Matt and say, hey, Matt, give me Devontae Smith and a first, and then give me AJ Brown. So then I can have a stud for a year and know, okay, I have a wide receiver 1. Or other beliefs you have in there too. I'd even say too, go try to do QJ in a second. Go get Tyreek Hill if the Beavers are rebuilding, because they're not going to need Tyreek Hill in 3 years. He's going to be dead. So like,
RIP again.
Not literally, figuratively, but like I would do whatever I could to guarantee I at least have 1 wide receiver 1, and his team right now does not have one that I can guarantee. And I think there's, again, because of some of the trades that have happened and the way the rapport has been built with some of these players, they're all trending down in my book. And the only green signal to me is DJ Moore. Okay, and QJ has like all his wide receivers gone, so okay, maybe he could become that guy, but the guy couldn't catch a cold if it was sneezed on him. So I just don't know. Like, you're just playing with fire there. And again, I think Evan Ingram can be great, but then there's buts there too, right? They got rid of Calvin Ridley, so they're bringing another stud. Is it going to be Kirk and a stud, and now Ingram gets 80 catches a year? I don't know. So but you're right. There are pieces that I like. Other things I might try to do too. Take Ramondre, go devalue him, go get like a Jalen Warren or a Tyjae Spears, and get an extra piece with it for Ramondre Stevenson if they think he's going to be the number 1 running back. Like,
I like that.
To me, it's the problem with James, and it's not so much his roster. It's the problem with him as the manager is he needs to go out and see what other people's value of his assets are, and he doesn't do that. Like, he doesn't know if someone thinks Evan Ingram is a top 5 wide receiver or if they think he's top 15, and who thinks they're top 5 and what do they have that he can creatively try to make do. He takes what's brought to him from other people and he says, all right, that kind of seems fair, or oh no, that doesn't seem fair. And he just kind of then makes these shotgun things where he thinks it's improving his team, but a lot of times he's misvaluing his assets because someone else tried to misvalue them and he bought into whatever they were selling and he makes these trades. And so that's the biggest thing is I would say, like, if there's one advice I'd have to James, but also on the roster side, like, do your own evaluation, get at least 6 other managers' evaluations in the league. And if you're drastically different, or if they're all drastically different, you got something. Go fucking sell and negotiate and do that work. And if they're all like, no, he's wide receiver, he's like a 20 to 25 wide receiver. Okay. If everyone says the same exact thing, but you're like, no, he's a 12 wide receiver, then maybe you're probably more 2025. Once you start getting some variance, someone's like, oh yeah, I'm kind of interested in that. Like, what do you want? And seeing those pieces, or someone's offering you a third, another person's offering you a first, or even a second and or 2 seconds. You start to now know, okay, someone's misvaluing you in this player, and how do you try to make that move? So that's really the advice I would have here. You're right. There is a lot of pieces. To me, I would try to get off the riskier assets now, because I think that you're right. There are people that will DJ Moore top 6. If Dan wanted to build right now, fucking Dan would pay you 2 first for DJ Moore, probably,
as he probably should. But you brought up you touched on something that I remember from in our first podcast episode. We got a YouTube comment from a manager in our league, the Angry Beavers of Port Chester, and they asked, how do you define, or how do you describe what it means to go all in? Because we talk about it a lot. We say, like, oh, this team should just go all in, and that could mean a number of things. Is that you consolidate all your assets for one really good starting lineup and just run that risk? Or do you trade away all your picks and go get a ton of players so you don't have to go make trade? You have all your polls covered. Like, let's keep it short, but how would you describe going all in, and how would you do so? Especially maybe with James Draught as an example.
With James Draught, I'd do exactly that. I would consolidate. I would say, I'll give you QJ and Godwin for AJ Brown. And I would just take those 2 gone. And then I would try to do, okay, James Conner, I'll add a first and give me Travis Etienne. And, I would try to do these moves on people that are in their prime, and I'm giving people that are competitive, maybe top 18, with something, a second, a first, whatever it is, to level up to that next thing. And it's truly meaning that if you're going truly all in, you probably have a wide receiver and running back 1 and 2 across your entire board. Like, even your 4th wide receiver is a wide receiver 2 fringe on weeks, and it's at minimum wide receiver 3, top 36 every week. Your running backs are wide receiver 2s. You always have an RB1, and you have at least an RB2, but probably someone that's more in the top 18-ish. Your quarterback's top 8. Your tight ends top 6. That to me is, if you want to build all in, that's your starting lineup. You don't need a ton of depth in there, but I think you need 1 in each, and then you need to hope your buys don't hit you bad 1 week. But if they do, it's only 1 week, and now you have all those great starters every other week, and it's like, all right, fuck it, I'm going to lose that week probably, and you let it kind of ride. But yeah, you probably have no firsts, you have almost no or no seconds, and you have built your team to where you have a lineup that you could not draft in a redraft draft team. Is kind of the way I have to view it. Is like that redraft team is impossible to actually make unless you are trading picks.
I really like the way you described the roster construction, because that was not where my head had gone when I saw the question. So I think that's a really good way of answer. Listen, it's funny because the way I described it was how I would describe going all in is you can never let the fear of losing out on future value dictate your lineup decisions. So you have to be okay with, and that's not true for everyone. Like, obviously, Brent a couple years ago, I wouldn't say got lucky, but built a good team where he could afford to also still keep his picks. And I've built my team in a way that's I can afford to hold on to prospective players and not cash them in. But I would say for some players that the picturesque one I would say is, like, the perfect example is, if my team wasn't as strong as it feels right now, I would have to be okay with letting JSN go right now to go get like a DK Metcalf or a Deebo Samuel and say, yeah, I might have just given up the next Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I can't afford to wait to see if what he might become. I have to be willing to go all in and go get, hey, I'll give you JSN for Devontae Adams and Gabe Davis, and just fill out my roster with a good wide receiver 1 and a solid backup, and say, yeah, I gave up 9 years of age and a potential stud, but I'm not, I have to be willing to say, in preseason, if I think I'm just a running back away, I have to be willing to trade my 2025 first to go get Tony Pollard and say, yeah, Tony Pollard's wheels could fall off, but also he could be the piece that sets me up because, like it or not, you can say I want to wait till midseason to see if I'm a contender before I make that move. That might be too late because if you get Tony Pollard week 1, you get every week of his production. If you wait until week 8 to buy him, you lost out on 7 weeks of production. And maybe you're a 5-2 team or a 4-3 team, but now, or maybe you're 3-4 and you would have been 5-2 and you already lost out on your chance to be a contender. So I'm not saying go trade your 25 first right now, but I'm saying if you think you're one piece away, you can't be afraid of losing out on that future value. Oh no, I might make a mistake. Like that to me, that's going all in. That doesn't mean doing what Gilday did and trade all of your picks away to get a few players to follow the lineup. I'm not saying he did anything wrong. I think his team was super strong. He almost made the finals, but it's just that mindset of, you know what? I know Christian Watson's going to be good. I'm okay with letting him go for Amari Cooper. You know, someone who's 30 years old, who's a wide receiver 2 or 3 at best. Actually, he might even be too good of a player. Like, I give up Christian Watson for Tyler Lockett and say, fuck it. I just want the production. Maybe it's only 1 season left of production, but I can't stand to wait for what ifs with Christian Watson if I'm a contender right now.
Yeah, I think that, and I'd say if there's one lesson that I've learned this year as I'm evaluating my team and what I would do differently, and I should have done differently probably 3 years ago. Like after I won the championship, the second year is when I probably should have done this. I have always been one of the teams that's had depth. Like I've always had just a really strong third running back. I've always had a really strong flexes with several others on my bench that it's tough for me to pick who my flex was. Even when we went to 2 flexes, it's been tough to pick those 2 flexes on certain weeks. I have failed where I should have done what I just said what I just pitched for James to do. And so I think it's like something that our league has not adopted to, where it's like, hey, I'll give you QJ and Chris and Godwin to get X. That is, you know, if you're going from maybe projecting like wide receiver 30 and wide receiver potential 18 to try to get a wide receiver 12, that's a trade that I never made, to either give that team some depth or just make them better. So, yeah, I think that's the biggest lesson that I'm going to take into this year and try to really start looking at, okay, if I have too much depth, which I haven't really ever thought of being a problem, how can I parlay that to actually be a little bit more all in with better players?
Awesome. Okay, let's move on to our last team I have here. So the last team is the Bolton's Landing Nessis. This team has very similar career arc to the Staten Island Pizza Rats. They've had 1 winning season in their 5 years in the league. They do have a championship loss. They did finish runner-up in 2020, so they have pocketed some cash. They've paid for a few future seasons, so they were playing with house money for a couple years. But if I go to their startup draft, they're the team that actually took Michael Thomas in the first, and they had Aaron Jones, Robert Woods, Calvin Ridley. Like they have a really good foundation here. They end up getting Dak. They actually drafted Josh Allen in the 11th. So overall, this team did a pretty good job in the startup. Fast forward to a couple years. Their lineup in 2021, at the end of 2021, they had Derek Carr as their QB with Justin Fields on the bench. I don't think he had started yet in 2021. I think that was his rookie year. And he had Nick Chubb and Aaron Jones at running back, who were phenomenal. With Damian Harris and Miles Sanders on the bench, Damian Harris was a stud that in 2021. I think he had 15 touchdowns in 2021. His wide receiver room was Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, and Deontay Johnson. I believe that was Deontay Johnson's wide receiver 10 year or whatever that was. He had a strong team. Obviously, he had just come off a championship the year before. Like, he had a decent core. Fast forward to his lineup now. He's got Deshaun Watson at QB. He's still got Nick Chubb with 1 knee in his lineup. David Montgomery, who, again, Monty's the most underappreciated running back in the league. His wide receiving core is Jahan Dotson, Khalil Shakir, Cortland Sutton, and Jacoby Myers. He still has Deontay on the bench. And he's got Sam Laporta, TE1 at tight end, with Chuba Hubbard and Jerome Ford are also on his bench. So he's got some young running backs that flashed a little bit last year, but probably not fetching you much more than an early second, for being realistic. And even then, they're potential casualties to the draft. So not a super strong set of players. Now you're probably wondering what happened to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jalen Waddle. They've already touched on it. He traded away Jalen Waddle last year for 2 firsts and 2 seconds, and then trade away Amon-Ra St. Brown to the perennial back-to-back champ up until this past year for Han Dotson, David Montgomery, and a second. And that is just a travesty of a trade. But not every trade, like, again, we knew Amon-Ra St. Brown was coming on at the time. I think Brent did a really good job identifying that the Sun God was going to be a monster. Like, he had not yet had his monster breakout yet. He had a good end to his rookie season, a solid start. He got injured in like week 4 or 5 of, I think, the 2022 season. And then Brent pounced and made that offer. Trevor took it. I think to kind of what your point you're making about James was, Dave, I don't think he shopped Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he got an offer, saw it, said, seems pretty good. Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown's good. I spent a second on him. I'm getting back an RB1. I'm getting back another second round wide receiver with a second round pick on top. Not a terrible haul. But let's look at his picks before we talk about what we would do. So if we go to his picks, in 2021, he had 2 firsts in 2022. He was sitting on no firsts in 23 and all of his picks in 2024. So he had clearly made a couple trades. I don't remember how he got that first. I'm going to guess it was the Josh Allen, Nick Chubb trade. It was how he got Brent's first. And I'm not sure how he got Gilday's 2022 first. But if we look to his team in 2024, he's sitting on now the 102, the 109, the 202, the 211, his full suite of 2025 firsts and an extra 2026 first and second. So he's done an outstanding job building up some draft capital. Thank God, because his lineup is so fucking bad. So that was kind of a mouthful. Dave, you know the drill. What's the first thing you're doing? You're taking over this team. What assets do you like, don't like? What are you trying to build around? Are you identifying yourself as a potential contender this year? Are you continuing another rebuild? Are you going to see what happens? You're muted, Dave.
Oh, sorry, I just thought I was unmuting. I'm trying to be the 7th best team this year, and just missed the playoffs. I think there's too many young pieces tied with old that you have to see what's going to happen with them. Give them one more season at least. Like, Laporte is a stud, and so Jacoby Myers had a weirdly good year last year. And I don't know if you heard him on the shop with Robert Kraft, he's like, Devontae Adams said, I learned so much from Jacoby Myers, like things he had never even heard of or thought of before. Like, Jacoby Myers is really
That's awesome. I didn't hear that.
Wide receiver.
Devontae said that about Jacoby?
And then Kraft was like, yeah, we probably made a mistake letting him go. And it was just so Jacoby Myers, I mean, for Devontae Adams to be giving you that props, I never heard him give props about any other wide receivers ever played with. And he's played with some really good ones. Makes me somewhat optimistic. I know the Raiders is, we still don't really know who their quarterback's going to be, and there's a lot of challenges there. But right now it's Gardner Minshew, I think, or whoever. Anyways, I think that there's enough pieces there too that I want to see one more season of what they can become. And if there's something that, again, you get a great offer, I'd say accept it. But Khalil Shakir, I don't think he's going to be wide receiver 1. But again, Stephon Diggs had a bad year. Gabe Davis is gone. I don't know what he could become. Jahan Dotson, he's kind of been sitting in Terry McLaurin's shadow. Had a really bad year last year after a good rookie campaign. What can he truly become? I don't know. Right now, I'm not super optimistic on him, but maybe this is his year with a new QB that could actually come to fruition. So I kind of look at it that way. I think if there was something I would sell right now, I'd actually be selling the running backs and just say, you're not going to get anything out of them. I'd wait for in season. If Montgomery comes out blazing and Gibbs is still kind of this just switch gear pass catching back, sell him. And I'd sell him in the first 3 weeks. Go get just one first for him. Should be at least attainable if he's in a top 12 running back in those first few weeks. If you get a little more, get a little more, but like, get a first for David Montgomery. Same thing with Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, whenever he's healthy, comes back, looks like he's good. Go sell him to Matt. Go sell him to James. He'll probably pay you first for him. Go sell him to someone else that doesn't have great running backs or secured running backs. And think if they want to upgrade to those two guys, could be upgrades for a lot of the running backs in the league right now, at least for a year. And you're now walking out with picks to go eventually either trade for a better running back in the future, or you can, pick them in the draft whenever that draft comes. The remainder of the roster, though, there's just there is a lot of question marks, right? Like you still need to build up so much, and so that's why I'm saying is like be mid this year, sell the pieces you know you can sell, which to me is really only the running backs. You could sell Laporta for a nice little haul again too, but now you need to rebuild everything. Like there's nothing good without Laporta. I mean, I guess Chubb and Montgomery for maybe 1-2 more seasons probably on the top end. That I wouldn't try to do too much beyond those two. And then the rest, like, yeah, does Jerome Ford take over for Nick Chubb? He had a good campaign. He definitely could become the lead running back there. And see what you can make out of it. You're going to be buying with some picks and then picking some picks. You got to be probably studying that draft class whenever you do have to hit. But that's probably how I'm approaching this team. But honestly, of all the teams you looked at today, this is probably the most questionable because like Dan has Shuckles have so many picks. Like they can just buy anything they want.
Yeah, they have a clear direction.
Yeah.
This team doesn't.
Not clear direction. They have enough asses they can go get to a clear direction whichever way they want to go. James, kind of same situation, but all of his like bad wide receivers are all better than this. Like every single piece that James has is a notch above these, especially because he's not coming off of a one who has a stud rookie or now sophomore behind him. The other one didn't break his knee. That there's a lot less question marks on James' team, at least to be mid. This team, I don't even know if it can be mid this year. This team might just be the 11th best team and just stink again. So that's kind of that question mark. Is like I try to hopefully 1 or 2 hit. Take your picks this year. Hopefully 1 or 2 more hit, and now you have a core of 4. Maybe it's Laporta, Jacoby Myers, Khalil Shakir, and then like your 4th other pick that you can make, and that's your 4 or some other mixture of that. Maybe it's Jerome Ford. And that's your 4 running forward. But yeah, there's not a lot to love about this team. And so I think it might, again, take a couple of years. And that's where you can leverage your 2026 firsts and everything else. But again, it's finding the value of what people are going to be willing to sell things to you for. And it's potentially doing, it's honestly, if there's other thing you could do is potentially doing the risk of what I did, where if you see some talent early on and you're like, oh, there's a lot of good things there. I bought Tank Dell and Rashee Rice last year for a first each. They're risky.
Hey, save it for your team's review.
I know. They weren't necessarily always gonna pan out, but that's what I would try to potentially do here, where you have those extra picks coming out in 2026. Go use one and take a swag at like a rookie that's like not hyper overperforming, but you can kind of see the breakout potential. And it's not just you. Listen to analysts, read blogs, ask online. There's so many places you can go and discuss it and read stuff. Do that research. And if there's one that you're like, all right, and you watch some film or just watch their gameplay and like, oh yeah, that guy kind of looks sick. Go just pull the trigger. And I bet you a lot of people would give those to you if they ended up drafting them it would come in Puka last year after his first, second game. Like Bo Malford said, if it's a first, he'll do it. And I was like, fuck you, I'm not doing it. That was too risky. And yeah, so that we got to those positions, it's just like, yeah, try to make those moves. I think it's going to be the other alternative.
Yeah, no, I think you made a ton of good points. I think man, the best thing this team's done in the last couple of years or this past year was get lucky and win the 102. Like,
it's that and hit the Sam Laporta pick last year,
right?
I was eye on Laporta in late second, and then he picked him up I think at like the 203, 204, which he might have made to me at 208, but I love Sam Laporta coming in, and so I only had a second round draft pick last year. But for him to make that pick, I mean, imagine if he picked. I should go look at the draft, but there's so many other bad. Imagine you got Tank Bigsby. What this team looks like. Like, I know. Shit, that team's bad.
No, yeah, and I think the big thing is, with all due respect, T-Bone, you gotta be a little bit more active. I think you miss out on a lot of this manager misses out on a ton of opportunities to make deals because he doesn't hit counter. He either doesn't see a trade, sees a trade and doesn't respond to it, or just flat out declines it, no conversation had. And I get it. Like, because I'm going to guess all of his offers are probably for his best assets. That's totally fine. That's every offer I ever get is for Jahmyr Gibbs or Nico Collins or CeeDee Lamb or whatever.
Hold on. That's also part of the problem for him, though. He accepted the offers on the other two. Like, Amon-Ra was not the right trade. Jalen Waddle was probably the right value for that pick. Like, that's probably a good trade. You take that trade. But imagine if he didn't do that and you're rolling this season. I don't think he got any other play. I guess he got Montgomery. It's still a starter on his team in Jahan Dotson. So you take out Dotson Montgomery, you back in Waddle and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like he only needs to use this. He doesn't need to spend anything. He still would have his first. He didn't trade it away either. Like he's pretty conscious with his own picks, which is good. So I think he has a lot of potential there to that. You just didn't make some of those trades for your best players because they were so young and they were so good. Your team's good. Those two and Sam Laporta, like you got a core that you can do some shit. And Ramondre.
Yeah, no, I think he does. Or no, Ramondre's on James's team, but yeah, I think the big thing is that he's never kicking the tires on any players in the league. Never mind the great ones, but even like he's not going to hey, what about Terry McLaurin? Like if I could use an extra piece, or and that might not be that expensive. You're a bad example because you have so much depth, but he could easily probably flip Chuba Hubbard or Jerome Ford or Nick Chubb right now, or combine them with a decent wide receiver. Go combine Deontay Johnson and Nick Chubb and just get a slightly better receiver.
He traded AJ Brown in 2021 too.
AJ Brown?
He had Amon-Ra St. Brown, AJ Brown, and Jalen Waddle.
Damn. That's how he got Gildays first. I remember.
And that's how we got Miles Sanders and Kenny Golladay.
Gotcha. So the thing I would identify is the 102 is almost untradeable. Unless I got some sort of Godfather deal from somebody that would offer me still a top 6 first this year and a 25 first, then I'll move off of it. And that sounds like it's a lot, but I'm sorry. The Malik Neighbors prospect hype has gone through the roof to the point where I'm like, if you really want to come get him, give me the 106 and a 25 first, and then we're talking.
I don't know. Now Dunze's climbing up.
Right. Or Rumadunze. Either way, those two have gotten.
Yeah, do it.
Right. Right. If Bohm is super hyped on Neighbors and down on Dunze, then trade the 102 for the 103 and a 25 second. Just start. I think the one thing that we didn't really talk about, and I'll talk about it more when we get to my roster review, though, is I would rather consolidate all my picks into one class. I like having the ability to control the draft and know, hey, I'm going to take a guy in this tier at 104, a guy in this tier at 108, and a guy at this tier at 205. And I can kind of say, hey, I know that one guy in between me wants running back. Everybody else is going to take receiver. So I'll take the running back at 104. And that'll force his hand at 107, and I can get a different guy. I like that ability better. And when you have multiple picks in the same draft, you have multiple chances at winning the 101. Last year, I had 2 lottery picks, didn't win the 101. This year, I had 2 lottery picks, I won the 101. So it's like you just give yourself more outs and chances at the apple, if you will. So if he was going to trade the 102, I would wait till the draft and try to get at the very least 2 firsts in return, whether it's a later first this year and a 25 first next year, or 225 first next year, or if Dan really loves Malik Neighbors, he can get 226 first from Dan, and now he'll have 4 2026 first. I think that'd be a really savvy trade. He probably can get even more than that because 2026 is so far away. You might be able to get 226 first and a second this year. And that's a fine way to restock your team and stay. And you still have the 109. You could still take a crack at somebody there. So that's kind of the creative things I'd be doing if I had taken over this team. Just how can I repurpose my most valuable asset? Because like you said, this team is probably the most suspect because it has no direction. It has old players, it has young players, it has mid players, it has a few studs, it has a handful of picks, but nothing overloaded. It's a mix of blah. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So that's it for the roster reviews we have today. We're an hour and 20 minutes in. I did have one more thing, but do you want to save it for next episode, or do you want to get to it now?
Oh, your call, buddy. You're leading.
All right, if it's not too long. So we had our first Dynasty trade of our offseason, our only trade of the offseason so far this year. And it caused a lot of drama and not drama, but just got the chat going, which I think is the best part about trades. Is nothing better than an immediate knee-jerk reaction from every other manager in the league that had an opportunity to make a trade to just tell you how bad your trade was. So I wanted to bring up the trade. So keep in mind, we're a 1 quarterback, full PPR, 12 team.
I forgot this trade happened already.
So their trade was Nico Collins, Rashad White, a 104 this year for Jamar Chase. So without doing lineups aside, I want to just say, like, just a pure, I want to get your gut reaction to if you saw this trade, somebody was asking you about it from a league they're in. You don't know anything about their teams. It's like, hey, is this a fair trade? And what's your need? What's your gut instinct say right away?
So it's tough. It's really tough. I don't love the 104. I wish that the 104 was a top 3 pick, because if it's a top 3 pick, 1 QB, I know you're getting a top 3 wide receiver. Any of those guys could be top 12 wide receiver 1 if they develop right with the right team. So maybe pending the NFL draft, if they all go to good teams and we all believe they're going to be in good situations, then sure, I actually do like this trade, because you think you got Nico for a couple of years, you got Rachaad White for a couple of years, and then you have now another potential stud wide receiver just to give up, a top 6 wide receiver. But on paper, say this was just a first. Say this was pre-lottery. Say this was like the middle of last year. Nico's going off, Rachaad White's going off, and they added a first for it. It's not a fair trade, because for me, you're trading up a guaranteed thing, right? There's so few, there's 6 to 8 of wide receiver and running back that are just guaranteed going to be ball getters, target hogs, that are just going to be dominating that team's percentage of ball handling. And so these two have had amazing years. You've only seen it done once for each of them. And there was also the challenge for me that was also really tough was this was done pre-draft. If this was after the draft and I knew the Bucks had nothing else coming in, no trade was made, there's nothing else coming in, I like it a little bit more. Like if I know Rachaad White's their guy for 1 or 2 more years, love it. Like I don't love it. I'm okay to liking it. Right now we're pre-draft. I have no idea what they're going to do. I think they're probably going to take a running back in the first 3 rounds. And they say there's no good running backs. Fine, there's no good running backs for fantasy. There still could be running backs to compete for jobs and take the ball out of some of these guys' hands. And then the same thing for Nico Collins. Nico has done it great for 1 year. It's going to be CJ Stroud's 2nd year. There's injuries to take Tank Dell. He's in and out of the lineup. How does that actually impact if we have a full season? Also, his sophomore season, who's going to be wide receiver 1? Do they have a third wide receiver come in, old or young, to compete as well, to also add on to the team? There's just a lot of question marks there. So again, you're taking away a sure thing for 3, in my opinion, unsure things, at least for a couple of years, where Jamar Chase has 3 to 5 more years. Like I think everyone would be like, yeah, 3 to 5 more years, you're good. And so, and again, you might not be always top 6 or top 12, but like top 18 for sure. Even in bad years is the next 5 years for Jamar Chase. These other 3 assets, you just don't know that. And so you got a good haul. I think if you're building depth and you needed like a good example would be is this was T-Bone's team, and say he didn't have Sam Laporta, or say he did Sam Laporta, and he also had Jamar Chase. The question there could have been, this is a way to say, okay, I have a better running back. I have a better wide receiver than I have right now. And I'm adding a first top 4 pick. I should be able to, at least, even if it's not the top 3 wide receivers, even the 4, 5, 6 are not terrible. You could now have 3 starters on your team for 1 starter. Much different conversation. And so that's where like the full team does really matter to me. I don't like the trade on paper. I think it's not the most unfair offer on paper. It just feels to me, I guess the best way to do it in a redraft league, it's a fair trade. If it's the beginning of the season and they prove that they're all playing, like Shuckles getting the ball, Nico Collins wide receiver 1, and 1-4 turns into be whatever, a fair trade. That the problem is this isn't a redraft league, it's a dynasty league, and I have a lot of pause on what M. Gilday got into his team for the dynasty purposes of this. And again, it was made in the offseason, pre-draft. That is such a risky fucking trade that I don't know what his. And the other thing too, I guess that there's one piece that I would say too. Why didn't he offer this to anyone else? And maybe he did, but like this should have been shopped to literally every fucking. I would have put it in the chat. I am selling Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is for fucking sale, and you would have gotten 3 people bidding it at least, and you probably could have gotten a full other asset on top of this, and maybe you wouldn't have paid for it. I know you
right, maybe not
got the trade, but
I would have thrown in Traylon Burks.
Yeah, so but you get that going, and that's exactly what happened last year. Was that Trevor made it public, and at least in some regards, that he was willing to move off Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, he came to me.
And Matt and I bid up, and he did a good job. I'll say in that scenario was he didn't do it with Amon-Ra. Again, opportunities. He got full value for Jalen Waddle because he did that.
That's such a
why
good
Matt
point.
wouldn't do the exact same thing here with Jamar Chase is I would have moved mountain and earth to get Jamar Chase. I would have
Yeah.
given
So
him 2 firsts. I would have given him Rashee Rice.
you
I
don't
would
have
have
any
given
first,
him.
so relax. So you bring up a couple points that I want to say before I forget. The first thing was, so Dan and I were texting on the side, and I was like, this team, the Sultan of Swag, me. Okay, so I had a unique team where I had those types of assets to burn that very few other teams had in the chamber that still could be competitive. Like, there's no doubt in my mind somebody could have offered 3 firsts for Jamar Chase, right? Which I think you would say on paper, if you just said this pure value of the players on this Gilday side are worth probably about 3.5 to 4 firsts, just based on like the 104. We're not worth 1 first because I wouldn't trade it. Nobody's trading the 104 for a future 25 first, right? It would have to be the 25 first in a second, or maybe 2 seconds, or maybe even 2 25 firsts to get the 104. Rashad White is probably worth the 107, 108. Like, he's definitely not worth the top 6 first, but he's definitely not worth a second. And Nico Collins is probably worth the top 6 first also. Like, not the top 3, but definitely 4, 5, or 6. Like, so that's the equivalent of like 4-ish firsts of just paper value for Jamar Chase. So I think Gilday got a good haul in terms of value. And I don't think anybody else could have matched that level of value plus picks. That I know he had talked to me about how he wants to get back in the draft. He hates how he couldn't draft last year, and he traded on draft day, and he didn't want to do that again. And he has no picks for the next 2 years. And I was like, oh, lucky for you, I have some picks. And like, we went back and forth. The one thing I will say that I think you're spot on about is the shopping him, and just in order to drive the price up with me. Just knowing that I don't care if nobody else can beat it. Putting that out there into the chat maybe gets me to say, fine, fuck it. What do I have to do to get you to shut the fuck up and chat?
Well, wasn't this also pre knowing the order?
No, it was after.
It was after. Okay, so like in that example too, right? If you want to get in the draft, Trevor has 2 firsts.
Yeah.
And Sam Laporta, like I put it on paper. If you're saying 3, I would have rather had 2 firsts, and I would have had the 2 and the 9 and Sam Laporta.
Is T-Bone in a position to give the 2 and the 9 and Laporta to go get Jamar Chase? We just kind of went over his roster. It's really not in a position to be making a deal like that.
But that's the thing. Like that's the question of, right? Like what, and that's the piece I haven't talked to Matt about. I really should, but like, what's his intention for these players? Again, of self-evaluation of players. Does he think Nico's going to be the wide receiver one for 3 more years? If he does, it's a great deal. Does he think Rashad White is going to be a top 12 running back for the next 2 seasons and top 18 for the next 3? If he does, great trade. So if that's his evaluation, and these are dynasty players that are in his starting lineup for the next 2 to 3 years, it's a phenomenal trade. The question is, I don't, and this is why I reacted the way I did in the chat, was I didn't value it that way, to where I think that his assumption is their ceiling, and it's very rare that a player hits their ceiling several years in a row. It's just a la even Devontae Smith last year, even Jamar Chase last year with injuries to Joe Burrow, whatever. Shit happens. It's very rare that players do that. And so where's their floor beyond that? And these 2 have only had 1 good season. I don't know where their floor is. Like, their floor could be quite low depending on how things evolve, change, go through the draft, etc. And that's my point would be for Matt. And like, I don't know what other top players he might covet, but like, if he was looking for a 1-year thing, go get Tyreek Hill. Like, go get AJ Brown. Like, I guess he has AJ Brown.
Yeah,
like,
I know what you mean.
But yeah, in that vein, like, other people would have given you 2 starters and a first or 2 firsts to get Jamar Chase, who's going to elevate their lineup because they have a 3rd running back, or they have a 3rd or 4th wide receiver that they're okay plugging into flex positions. And that's kind of that question that I don't think he shopped it anywhere. And maybe I don't have the pieces, and that's why he didn't talk to me, but I haven't heard of anyone else that was like, holy shit, we were so close. Like, what happened? Like, it's not like no one else knew Jamar Chase was on the market except for you. And that's such a huge advantage. And like, he siloed himself in a terrible, terrible way that like, that's the more frustrating thing than anything. I think it's like, no.
Yeah, I think maybe like I looked around the league and I'm like, well, there's just nobody else that could offer this level of youth, talent, and production last year, and I guess perceived value. Like you said, it's up to what he thinks of them. I think some would say Nico is probably very close to Tyreek Hill in terms of production next year, and then he's also 6 years younger. And Rashad White, he was a running back 4 last year. I don't expect him to be a repeat running back 4, but he's probably a top 12, top 15 running back next year. I don't think there's many other teams that could stomach offering a top 6 pick and 2 high quality wide receiver 2 or better players or running back 2, wide receiver 2 that clearly showed their ceiling is top 12. But what's funny is, mid-season last year, there was another trade that went down. It's very similar to this, where the Beavers traded away Breece Hall for just 2 random, now late firsts in T. Higgins. And you said that is a massive overpay. Why would you ever pay 2 firsts and T. Higgins for Breece Hall? And yet I just gave up the equivalent of 3-4 firsts value for Jamar Chase. And the reactions are so polar. I'm just curious why one you saw as an overpay and one you saw as an underpay.
You said they paid 2 firsts and T. Higgins, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Brent's first ended up, or the first he traded ended up becoming was your first, so it was the 110.
Okay. So it
was 110 T. Higgins and a 26 first.
So the challenge I had there that I was so frustrated with is one, Breece Hall just came back from his ACL tear. So I was like, hey, like he's had some flashes, but that's a risky play there on his own. He's had some amazing shining moments before injury, and then even some after that. You could see him potentially pan out. But the reason that I thought that was such an overpay going into the season, this is again preseason.
Oh, this was like week 6.
I know. Preseason.
Oh, okay.
So laying the ground.
Sorry.
Preseason, I valued T. Higgins, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, all in the same tier.
Yep, I agree.
I had just offered 2 firsts and a second for Jalen Waddle. I had offered 2 firsts and a second for Devontae Smith. If I even thought Brent was going to move off T. Higgins, I would have made the same fucking offer to him. So in my head,
now you're saying it's a 4 firsts and a second for Breece Hall.
4 firsts and a second for Breece Hall, and I'm like, holy shit, that's and again, he's probably like 3 games back from an ACL injury where he's only played like 5 snaps a game and starts showing some flash, but like, holy shit, that's an overpay. Or like you're really making some broad assumptions of what he's going to be for the next 3 years. Whereas like I felt confident what T. Higgins could be, and whether he stays on the Bengals or not, I think he can be a wide receiver 1. He can be a top 12 wide receiver. So to me, that's where I stuck in the back of my mind. I was like, oh my God. And I even went to the Beavers and I said, guys, I said, if I hadn't just bought Tank Dell and Rashee Rice, I would have offered you 2 firsts for T. Higgins right now. And I said that was a crazy trade to have that thrown in. And to me, the other thing that I got that was so, and if you want to call it overpay or just even in line, say Breece Hall had his great season, say it was his rookie campaign pre-injury, and he paid that, I would say it was an even trade, because what I was proving back is I have a proven commodity. He's not currently wide receiver 1. I'm anticipating to be wide receiver 1, or assuming the person that traded for him is anticipating to become a wide receiver 1. And I got 2 first picks. Sure, I'm giving up probably right now a top 6 running back that is young and going to be here for 5 years. But the value I have in the background, like it's too valuable to not make that trade. And that's the piece for me where with Nico and Rachaad White, I don't have those same feelings towards. And it's also too, because like they've been here for a little bit. They had never done anything until last year. They had opportunities. They proved it. They could do it. Does that maintain with the opportunities? And do they maintain they can still do it in year 2 when they've now had a little swagger, another step? And, do they grow into that player that you actually want them to be? So that's the difference in my reaction for sure of what was paid and what was moved.
Definitely. No, I think you made a lot of good points there. I just wanted to, as I was thinking about it, I was like, hey, that's a pretty similar value in trade. Mine's probably about 3.5 to 4 firsts. And like you said, same for Breece Hall.
Here, I'll give you one other trade that could have been made for Jamar Chase. Puka Nacua and 2 firsts. Or Puka Nacua and 1 first.
Yep, Puka and a first. That was the one other trade I texted to Dan was the only person that even has a similar caliber and youth player that's like an unproven but could be hit is like all I think of is like Puka, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins. And no offense, I don't think you have the assets to add to Tank Dell to go get Chase right now. I mean,
unless if you want to draft.
Right. Unless you added CMC, and then it's like, then you're like, well, what am I doing?
That's a person that, and again, he's so close to Bohm, and maybe they did talk about it.
So Bohm knew about the trade, so that's why I'm like, if Bohm had every chance to offer, for your reference, I had offered the one thing that I think Gilday knows, if he just kept holding out, I was going to keep adding to this trade. Because I started out, it was Rachaad White, Nico Collins in the 112, and he was like, that's really good. And then it was Rachaad White, Amari Cooper, Nico Collins in the 112, and he was like, no. And then eventually I added the 104. I was like, this is my final offer. So either take it or I'm trading the 104 to someone else. And because I had been shopping the 104 to multiple other people in the league. I made a similar offer to the Turtles for Garrett Wilson, and they told me it was the worst offer they've ever seen. So I was like, oh,
you're not getting
okay.
a jet. You're not going to get a jet from the Turtles.
I know. I love Austin though, because sometimes he'd be like, "That's the fucking worst they've ever seen." And sometimes like, "That's what's pretty curious." He's a funny dude. But
yeah.
All right, Dave. It's been an hour and a half. I had a lot of fun. Cheers, bud. I think we should close on this and get ready for the next week's episode.
Cheers, doggy. Have a good night, everybody.
All right. Peace out.
Bye.